of you have been part of Freedom Defense Canada for a number of years, you'll know that we started about 6 years ago, and we've tried to be faithful to the objectives of Freedom Defense Canada. And I just want to start with that once again to Freedom Defense Canada. The purpose of Freedom Defense Canada is to defend and to promote traditional values on current social issues. We will equip others to counteract the prevailing liberal ideology which intrudes upon our basic rights and freedoms. And we will empower social conservatives and other conservatives through support and communication to have an effective voice in the public arena. Well, with the current events that have been going on around us in the last few months, the truckers convoy, the freedom convoy, and the way in which the government used them and abused them, certainly our freedoms have been attacked in a very open manner. The world situation with the Russian invasion of Ukraine has made us all very much aware of the need to preserve our freedoms here in Canada, which we have been losing over the last few years. The COVID experience that all of us have gone through, and we've seen government trample upon rights and freedoms in the name of tackling COVID. So it's clear that we live in a world and in a country where we certainly are experiencing limited freedoms, far more than we ever used to. We've asked Candice Malcolm to come. Candice is the head of True North, and she is a very bright and articulate young woman who speaks clearly to the issues of the day. She is a best-selling author, an investigative journalist, a nationally syndicated columnist with the Toronto Sun, and the founder and editor-in-chief of True North. And she has incredible experience. She has reported from war zones, broken news stories that have made headlines worldwide, and exposed major terrorist networks operating even in Canada. She was born and raised in Vancouver, BC, so she's a West Coast girl, and she has 2 master's degrees, has traveled all over the world, and she is happily married with 2 children. So Candice, it's a real pleasure to welcome you here and to the members of Freedom Defense Canada, and we look forward to what you have to say to us, particularly on the subject of alternate media in an age when, of course, the mainstream media hardly pays any attention to conservative values. So welcome, glad you're here.
All right, well, thank you so much, Reed, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to Perry for inviting me. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here today with you all. I actually went to high school on Vancouver Island. That's not in my bio, but I lived in Campbell River with my mom for 4 years. And so I'm really familiar with the island. I spent a bunch of time there. My sister went to UVic as well. So I next time I come back home, I'm out in the East Coast now, but next time I'm back home, I'll have to try to figure out if I can meet everybody and come to one of your luncheons or your dinners or something in person, because I love the island. Yeah.
Hi, sorry, can I just interrupt you?
Sure.
We missed a little section here. I just want to explain how this will go for people so they're listening, and then
Sure.
we can get right back to what you're saying. So everybody, my name is Perry Foster. I'm the Communications Director for Freedom Defense Canada. I'm going to be managing today's event. So we ask that you keep your mics muted during Candice's presentation. I'm sure you all have already. After the presentation, we'll be having a question and answer session, and I'll let you know the details of that when that time comes. And we'd like to remind everyone that this event's being recorded and it'll be posted on our Freedom Defense Canada website. So anyway, back to you, Candice. Sorry for interrupting. So.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's good to have it. So yeah, whoops.
Settings.
We can just mute their line. That would be great. So yeah, I'm gonna talk to you for 25-30 minutes, and then we can open up to Q&A. And the ground I want to cover, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, about True North, the organization that I founded, and the purpose of independent media in Canada. I want to address a problem because there's a huge problem in Canada, and that is the out of control propaganda that comes from the legacy media and how completely dishonest they are. I was going to talk about it in the context of COVID when Perry first invited me to come, but the trucker convoy has created such a perfect example for us. I think a case study that we'll be talking about for years and years and years on media bias and how that can help fuel government policy. So I'm gonna talk about the problem, address how we got here, a little bit of a timeline, talk about that case study, and then some ideas I have to fix the problem. Like Reed said in that kind introduction, my name is Candice Malcolm. I'm a journalist. I've been working with the Toronto Sun on and off for the last 10 years. I actually started out at Sun News Network back when that was a thing, and have worked in various forms, writing for, as a freelancer, writing for American publications, Canadian publications. And then it was in 2016, I wrote a book called Losing True North, focused on the catastrophic flaws in Justin Trudeau's immigration policies, that I decided to start True North to focus on investigative reporting to do with immigration, integration, the refugee policies, terrorism Canada, which was sort of my beat as well, the area that I covered, just given my background. I did graduate school studying international relations and foreign policy. So I started True North with a focus on immigration. And we sort of ended up just kind of pivoting and going towards where there was a niche, which was just in telling independent stories, telling the other side of the story. I think that there's a huge demand for independent media in Canada, and partially that is because of the climate that has been created by the Trudeau government. So I want to give you a little bit of a timeline, because it's interesting if you wonder like why media bias has gotten so bad, why has it intensified so much over the past few years. You only have to look to our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. He is to blame for this, and I'll explain why. So back in 2012, Stephen Harper was in power, and part of what he did was he ran big deficits during the financial recession. He spent more money than he had, and by 2012 his government was committed to getting back on track. So they had something called the Deficit Reduction Action Program, where they sought to cut 5 to 10% across the board from every government, kind of taking a page from Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien and how they addressed their incredible deficit that almost hit a debt wall back in the 90s. So Harper committed to cutting 5 to 10% of every department, and that included the CBC. So the CBC saw its budget cut by $115 million over 3 years. So we're talking about an organization that gets paid $1.1 billion a year. Harper announced a cut that averaged about $35 to $40 million a year, which represents a 3% cut. Okay, so Harper says he's going to cut CBC by 3% in 2012. He does. 2015 comes around. Thomas Mulcair, remember him? He was the leader of the NDP, and it looked like he was sort of poised to potentially displace the Liberals and become the sort of two-party system that they have in the UK with a Labour and a Conservative. Well, in Canada, it was looking like it was going to be like that between the NDP and the Conservatives. So Mulcair jumped in to say that he would reverse these cuts. So already you have a premise in an election where you have one government, the Conservatives, say one party, the Conservatives, saying we will cut the CBC by 3%. The other party, the NDP, saying that we will maintain funding. So we will increase the funding of the CBC by 3%. Well, not to be outdone, Justin Trudeau, the leader of the third party at the time, Liberal Party, blew them both out of the water and pledged a remarkable 15% increase to the CBC's budget. He pledged that he would give them $150 million in additional funding per year. So 15% to counteract a 3% cut. Okay, so we all know what happened there. History happened. Justin Trudeau got elected prime minister, followed through with that pledge. CBC gets $150 in new funding per year. So part of what they do with this is they invest it into their English language digital media program. So the $150 million goes towards basically creating an online competitor to legacy newspapers. So most people your age read the newspaper, you read it in a physical form. Most people my age read the news on our phones. We actually read the news in just as high numbers as the older generations, millennials do, but we read it almost entirely online. And so whereas newspapers used to have rely on subscriptions, subscription dollars and ad dollars in the physical. So if you think about what a physical newspaper subscription that gets delivered to your door, what's the online equivalent? The online equivalent is a paywall. So the entire online media ecosystem was already facing trouble, because the idea is that first of all, Google and Facebook are much better at ads. They're much better at identifying potential clients for businesses. So people would much prefer the sort of online targeted ads that you can get from Facebook and Google versus the traditional ads on media companies. But also it all relies on a paywall. And the culture online is that everything's free, right? Gmail's free, Facebook is free. I'm sure someone's paying for Zoom, and that's sort of something that, you know, even people watching this right now, it's free. It's free on YouTube. That's the culture. So newspapers are already stuck against this problem of a changing landscape, and they failed to adopt. But they're trying to create a culture in Canada where people value the news enough to pay for it. And so they're trying to reinforce this value. And on the flip side, here is CBC creating a new business focused on online digital news for free. So if you think about it, if you're Googling something on what's happening, Ukraine, Russia today, 2 articles pop up in Google. One's the Vancouver Sun, and you've already reached your capacity, so you have to pay in order to read that. You have to go past the paywall and maybe pay $99 a month, or the exact same story on the CBC. The CBC will always be free. People are clicking on the CBC, and because of that, the CBC has become the #1 news website in Canada. There's no surprise at all. It's the most accessed news source. The highest ranked newspaper in the country is the Globe and Mail, and that is 8th. And so it's no surprise that the newspapers started to complain. So this is from a C2C report from Dr. Lydia Milan, who wrote that the Globe's publisher, whose name is Philip Crawley, told the House of Commons Heritage Committee that it's not a level playing field if taxpayer dollars directed towards the public broadcast make the competition for digital ad dollars more difficult. Likewise, the Globe and Mail Parliamentary Bureau Chief, Sean McCarthy, said, how do you persuade people to buy expensive subscriptions to the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail when you can go get the exact same content for free on the CBC? It's a huge challenge for newspapers. So the CBC is open about their competition. They are explicitly competing with legacy newspapers for digital eyeballs. They brag on their own 2020 strategy document, saying that there are more than 20 million Canadians who read our digital platforms each month, and that the CBC is working to transform itself into a digital media company. So this created a huge problem for the Trudeau government, because its own CBC subsidies were going in direct competition with the legacy media newspapers, and the newspapers were not happy about it. They began their own advocacy campaigns to lobby Trudeau. So what does Trudeau do? Well, being sort of a master cynic, in the 2019 election, the Liberals revisited the trick that they did in 2015, which is basically bribing journalists during an election, saying that your job depends on me, Justin Trudeau, winning the election. And so just right before the federal election, Trudeau's finance minister, Bill Morneau, announced a new program, a $959 million cash injection into Canada's failing newspaper. And so again, the rest is history. We have a situation where the majority of journalists in this country are either funded directly or subsidized by the Trudeau government. And the media can say, look, we're professional. We believe in journalism standards. We believe in sort of the separation of our newsroom from the politics. But the reality of human nature, like it was said, I look at and I study terrorist groups, and I have for most of my career. And one of the things we always do is like follow the money, follow the money, follow the money. And so it's impossible to divorce the fact that Trudeau government is funding these newspapers, these journalists, and in return, their coverage is just hard to divorce those two facts. Their coverage is entirely biased. I like to say that we are experiencing the 3 Bs of legacy media. They're boring, they're biased, and now they're beholden. So I think they're boring because there's such a sameness in Canadian media. They basically have a groupthink mentality. They have a hive mind phenomenon. Within the sort of realm of like the legacy media journalists, they're all mostly from 3 cities, Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto, or that's where they live. So they have a bias towards a sort of urban cosmopolitanism, trendy, the latest trend, progressive trend. We're seeing this throughout the media, not just in Canada, but there's sort of a new culture of cancel culture where there's a limited window of topics that you can talk about and you can't have an opinion on. The science is settled on like every major issue, and anyone who has an opposite opinion isn't just accused of being wrong. They're accused of being racist, sexist, homophobic, climate denier. You could go on and on. So there's sort of censorship creeping in, and there's sort of just a general lack of intellectual curiosity. So even at the height of the pandemic, I read a lot of media. I'm a news junkie, so I read a lot of news. And in the US, there were some really interesting contrarian think pieces, even in left-leaning publications like the New York Times, the Atlantic, Vanity Fair, saying, should we really be making little kids wear masks? Is this vaccine really as effective as we're being told? Just sort of like the same kinds of conversations. I love, by the way, that your group was founded out of Tim Hortons, because that's so Canadian. But the kind of stuff that you would be talking about in a coffee shop with your friends, you actually see those kind of interesting articles in American press. In Canada, it's like everything's the same. Everything's regurgitated. The press gallery in Ottawa is the most insular-minded institution perhaps in the country. They all write about the same things from the same perspective. So the problem of having a huge bloated CBC, which by default they have the statist mentality, is that they dominate the press conferences. Any press conference that you would go to with a politician certainly in Ottawa, but most of the country, the majority of journalists there are going to be CBC. Even during the election campaign, one of my colleagues, Andrew Lawton, we put him on the Conservative bus. There's like one Post Media reporter, one Toronto Star reporter, a Canadian Press reporter, and then like 7 people from the CBC. Right? They just have such a huge budget. There's so many people, and so that the mindset, all those people, they all have the same perspective, they all have the same opinion, and it just creates this ecosystem where everything is really the same. Same with the idea that they're biased. Most journalists are progressive, trendy progressives, left wing. That's sort of what draws them to profession. They all come from a handful of journalism schools, mostly Ryerson in downtown Toronto and Carleton in Ottawa. So again, they're taught by the same professors. They have the same opinions on everything, and they're incredibly pampered class as well. It's one of the things that became really obvious during the convoy, the trucker convoy, is that they felt so entitled to respect from the public, so entitled to be the ones who tell the story, so threatened by other people kind of crouching in on their territory, that you can see that they're just sort of this pampered class, and they're activists, not journalists. And then the whole beholden thing, it's like, they can try to say that they're independent and that they're not controlled by the government, but follow the money. Money and spending matters. And so, like I said, I think that what we just lived through, the trucker convoy, was the greatest case study in biased and beholden media in their country's history. So here we had a group of truckers, working class people, who sort of spontaneously decided to take a stand. They'd had enough, and they announced that they were going to do a slow roll starting in Vancouver, making their way to Ottawa to have their point heard, that they were tired of the mandates. They didn't want new rules. They didn't want new government policies encroaching on their ability to pay their bills and make a living. This is in the backdrop of, everyone must get COVID, everyone must get vaccinated. That's the only way out of the pandemic. And then, most people got vaccinated. I think it's like 90% of Canadians got vaccinated, and Canadian adults. And then, there was huge spikes of the vaccine anyway, or of the virus anyway. My whole household had COVID over Christmas, and we're all vaccinated. So, the idea that the vaccine was somehow going to protect you against COVID wasn't true. Omicron completely discredited that. And then in January, Trudeau moved forward with a vaccine mandate for cross-border truckers, which didn't make sense given that everyone else was loosening the restrictions. The UK had already announced that their restrictions were all completely gone. And so Trudeau is sort of like offside on this policy being punitive and mean. These truckers form a movement that, to me, my observation was that it was spontaneous, it was grassroots, it was bottom up, it had no leader. It was just a group of working class people saying, we've had enough, we're going to Ottawa to have our voices be heard. And then there was a huge outpouring of support and community and patriotism from Canadians who started gathering on the sides of highways, who started preparing food at truck stops and giving them out to the truckers. The highways were lined with people and Canadian flags, and it just grew bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's anticipation and there's excitement, and people were feeling inspired that someone was finally standing up to our overzealous politicians and their draconian policies. Almost immediately, the media, well, actually, the first story the CBC covered lied and said that the truckers were protesting. I kid you not. Bad road conditions. They were actually protesting the bad winter roads weren't being cleared fast enough. Apparently, that was not true at all. So a couple of days later, they had to actually acknowledge that this was a freedom convoy. These people were heading to Ottawa because they didn't want to deal with the vaccines anymore. But they were immediately written off as extremists. They immediately found experts out there to tell us that these people were far right, that their chats were violent, that they were poised to commit a January 6th type event, and really sort of pre-positioning this idea. These people were up to no good. They were nasty people. They shouldn't be taken seriously. There was even a question, the trucker convoy was set to get to Ottawa on Friday, and the main protest was on Saturday. On Wednesday, there was a news story asking Justin Trudeau if he expected violence. So that was the headline. Trudeau warns that there could be violence. And it wasn't like he came out and made a statement about that. The media went to him and asked him, do you think these people are going to be violent? I don't remember a protest in my entire life ever being covered in this way, so negative from the get-go. Usually reporters are, interested in protests. They're willing to give them a lot of time. They're willing to give them a spotlight and give them a fair shake. With the truckers, it was completely obvious from day one that they were not. Look, the truckers showed up. You guys all know this. It was again, a patriotic showing of national unity, if anything. Seeing people, Quebecers and Albertans side by side, waving flags, playing hockey together, singing, dancing. The media would get angrier and angrier, right? It's like they were both telling us it was a violent insurrection and also complaining about the bouncy castles and the hot tubs and like the carnival-like atmosphere. So everything that the media were doing was parroting the Trudeau government's talking points, right? One provocateur showed up with a Nazi flag, a despicable flag, and that was all that the media cared about. They decided they were going to judge the entire protest, the entire movement by one idiot with a flag, even though they never even bothered to interview that person or find out who he was or why he was there. From my own research, my estimate is that he was there for about 10 minutes. He showed up, he was there long enough to get taken 5 or 10 photos of him, and then he was gone. So the media didn't do its job in understanding the trucker convoy and understanding the concerns of it, and they gave Trudeau license to completely dismiss these people out of hand and say, I'm not talking to these people, they're Nazis, they're extremists, Canadians are sickened by them. The unfortunate thing for the legacy media and for the Liberal government is that Canadians can now see through them. And this is one of the beautiful things about the internet and why companies like True North are able to exist. Like traditionally in the media landscape, we relied on these sort of elite intermediaries to broadcast the news to us and to be our interpreters, to say like, here's the context, this is what's happening. In today's modern digital landscape, we just don't need that anymore. Everything is available at our fingertips. Anyone can go on their phone and look at videos and see with their own eyes how blatantly distorted the situation is being painted by the legacy media. Unfortunately, too many Canadians still do rely on the legacy media, which is why you sort of see polling split. However, the interesting thing is that people under the age of 30 overwhelmingly supported the truckers. Like this is bad news for Trudeau. Young people under 30, 60% of them said that they agreed with the truckers, which even if you just think for a second of like the demographics of like, young Canadians, they're on their phones, they're watching TikTok, they're watching Instagram, and they don't watch the legacy media. They don't even know what the legacy media is, or they're so removed from it. And so, of course, Trudeau relied on all of the misinformation from the media to not just dismiss the truckers and the rhetoric, but eventually to ramp it up to the point where they were using the Emergency Act to forcefully remove with excessive force peaceful protesters, unarmed peaceful protesters, and that all played out. And now finally, the chits are continuing to fall, and we are learning more and more just how unjustified the Trudeau government was. Their justification was so paper thin that they literally relied on a CBC report when they made the accusation that the truckers were that the funding was coming from the extremist groups. That wasn't true. And when they went to table their 14-page justification, they used a CBC. They didn't use police intel. They didn't use something from the RCMP or the security forces. They used a CBC report. So the entire thing is a mess. It was never justified. And I think that the media have outed themselves as just being untrustworthy in the eyes of so many Canadians. And so that's good news for us at True North, because like I said, we can cut through the sort of traditional legacy media intermediaries. We provide all of our content online. It's all free. We are funded entirely by donations, people who support our work, people who believe in our journalism. Most of our funding comes from very small dollar amounts, like $20, $30 donations from people who just believe in our journalism. And so because of that, we don't obviously have the same structural problems. The media still exists. And I mean, you can see they continue to paint themselves as victims. One of my favorite things that happened was the night that Trudeau announced the Emergency Act and enacted, this predecessor to the War Measures Act, supposed to be a national crisis, a period of war. He invokes this thing. Hold on, let me just double check the name of the organization. I think it was the Canadian Association of Journalists held an event, and it was called the Mainstream Media versus the Trucker Convoy. How do we combat media hate? So at the exact moment when the Trudeau government is, gearing up to squash a peaceful protest, the top journalists in the country, Glenn McGregor, Evan Solomon, Mercedes Stephensons, are all sitting on Twitter talking about how they're the real victims of this whole thing. There's another one, Carleton University this weekend. Actually, I think it might even be tonight. They're hosting an event. Oh no, it's Tuesday, March 8th. They're hosting an event called Journalism Under Siege, right? Against the backdrop of an actual war happening in Eastern Europe. There was a report that Sky News journalists were ambushed by a Russian death squad, and they were shot. Multiple journalists for Sky News were shot, even after they said, we're pressed. And they had to actually flee for their lives. So you have actual journalists under siege, but here you have the pampered Canadian media saying that they're under siege. Why? Because people were mean to them at the trucker convoy. Look, there were some instances of people getting pushed or whatever, and I don't endorse any of that, obviously. But the fact that the truckers didn't like the media, well, that was completely justified. It was because of the way that they were covering them and the things that they were saying about them, rather than trying to come to terms with that and say, hey, we're not really being fair here. Maybe we should take a step back. They double down on their own, narcissistic view that they're the most important people in the country, and that anyone who questions them is attacking not just the journalists, but the foundation of our democracy and journalism. So we've seen this so much in recent years. It's not a new phenomenon. It's happened in the US as well. But I think that we're just in a situation where you cannot trust what you see in the media. I've said that for a while, that the media is biased, but I'm now at a point where I do not believe anything I see in the legacy media. It saddens me to say, as someone who is a journalist and who's worked both in the mainstream and in the independent media, but just some of the stories that we've seen in recent days is just it could be parody. It's so absurd. So what can we do about this? Well, I think kind of going back to the beginning of my talk here, when I talked about how the Harper government cut the CBC's budget by 3%. I think that was a mistake. I think the Conservatives can't get out of this situation, the completely biased landscape in the media, by making 3% cuts. I think that the next person who leads the Conservative government of Canada has to completely defund the CBC. I think that will be the start of the problem, the start of the solution. Get rid of it, sell it off. Not our problem anymore. That 1.1 billion, I think it's now up to $1.4 billion a year, goes down to zero. That needs to be like an absolute top priority of the government. And then, once you eliminate some of the subsidies, you won't have to in turn subsidize the Globe and Mail and the National Post, because they won't have the CBC competing against them in the same way. So I'm not one of these people who believes in incremental change in government. I think they just need to rip the Band-Aid off. It is such a cancer in our society. It is creating so much division, so many problems, and it is leading the charge in bad behavior. So those are my thoughts anyway. And I would love to hear what you all have to say and what you think. So I think we can leave it at that for now. I'm happy to answer any question or go into more detail about any of these things as well.
Okay, let's move on to the next section of this then, and I'll explain how this will work. We're now going to a question and answer session. This is part of the event. And the way we'll do this is, if you would enter your questions you have for Candice in the chat box, then I'll redirect them to her. And if that goes well and we wish to expand from that, we can go to direct questions. I'm just going to check this now. Everybody, my IT expert is here right now. Can I enable it? Hold on. I see. Okay. Hosts and co-hosts. Should it be everybody doing it?
The questions come to you.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we've gone over that part of it, guys. So if you have a question for Candice, you can enter that in the chat box now, and then I'll redirect that to her. Okay. So maybe we'll take a couple of minutes for those questions to come in. Right. It might take a second or two here. And maybe some people are typing some. But in the meantime, maybe I'll ask Candice one myself. Candice, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so in the future, do you see a proliferation of independent media? Because we've looked at the mood of Canadians now, and I think the trucker convoy and the Freedom 2020 movement is an indicator of the popular feeling people have, right? So are you optimistic about a lot of small groups like ours, and also independent media organizations cropping up? Do you see that happening?
I think we've already seen it happen over the last few years. I think that there was a movement for a while to try to push more conservative voices in the mainstream media, the legacy media. And, I focus my talk today more on the newspapers because that's my own background. But, you could have my colleague, Andrew Lawton, who I hired at True North, and he's a longtime radio host, and he used to have a radio show in Calgary as well as London, Ontario, where he's from. And basically around the same time as this happened, there was a big purge in talk radio to get rid of conservative voices, especially social conservative Christian voices like Andrew Lawton. And so basically we've been chased out of the mainstream. We've been chased out of the public square by people who say that our opinions are, beyond the pale or whatever. And so I think that there is, you push conservative voices out of legacy media, you're going to push the audience out as well. And so I think what's happened in the last 5 years as well, the backdrop with sort of cancel culture and the sanitized discussion and a limited window of what we can talk about, a smaller and smaller Overton window, is that more people are going out on their own, more people are doing what Ezra Levant and the Rebel does. And, I worked with Ezra at Sun News Network when I was at the beginning of my career. And at Sun, he had a lot of restraints. He had a lot of people reading over his stuff, making sure that everything he was saying was going to be on board. And he had producers and people helping. When he went to Rebel, it was like completely unfiltered and unregulated. And, that's good and bad, right? And so I think that, the Rebel's not for everyone. And I wanted to create something that was alternative to that, also alternative to the media, the legacy media. And I think because of that, everyone can have their, find something that suits their own, temperament and their own beliefs. And you do kind of have like a proliferation of different types of organization. I think it's good. I think it's too bad that we can't all exist together in one square. But I don't
Right.
think that that's the fault of conservatives for going off on their own. It's a fault of the, like I said, the hive mindset of the legacy media and the establishment to say, like, you're not welcome here. So
Yeah, good. Okay, so we have some questions now. Thanks for answering that. I feel like you did that there should be maybe the formation of parallel policies, like other platforms for conservatives for sure. Okay, so Reed asks, do you fear direct government reprisals like freezing your bank accounts as a punishment for being anti-government?
I mean, it's terrifying, right? It's like, what kind of world do we live in where that's an actual thing on the table? I think that there definitely is government revenge out there, and I didn't get into this, but I can. In 2019, True North had to sue the federal government to allow to report at the debate. They wouldn't let us into the debate. They didn't give us a good reason, so we took them to court. We did an emergency injunction. The judge ruled in our favor and ruled that True North the government had to let True North in to report. So we won. And why did they single out True North and the Rebel while letting in the Vietnamese state government, the communist propagandist Chinese government media? Obviously they don't like us. They don't like what we're saying. They don't like what we're doing. And so they came up with an excuse. So we've seen government targeting independent journalists before. Now we see them freezing bank accounts. It's scary times in that way. I work really hard to make sure that everything we do is above board. We are a charity, and so we have to comply with CRA regulations, and we have, a law firm and accountants that we work with, and we have a full-time sort of regulatory person on our staff that makes sure that we follow all of the rules and file everything in the right way. But because of that, we're able to give tax receipts for our donors. We're able to apply for larger grants from foundations. And so so far so good. They haven't come after us. So I think that we walk a fine line in our society at scary times when that kind of stuff is actually happening. I hope the government gets sued and sued and sued, and that this kind of stuff is never able to happen again.
Right. Yeah, my wish as well. And so from Julian, we have, can Candice comment on links to trucker convoy with the group? And I don't know about this issue. Diagolon? Do you know about?
I'm not. No, I'm
Not
so
familiar
sorry. I'm
with
not
that.
familiar with that at all. Never heard of it.
Okay, we'll let that one pass, I think, and we'll go on to the next one. Okay, Patrushka writes, Evan Sullivan, to be fair in his comments on the day of the EMA, although someone had spat on him, he made little of it. Are there journalists who are, in your view, less biased in their presentations?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a spectrum. And like I said, I think that there was really bad behavior and despicable behavior from some people at the trucker convoy. Like I said, there's I think a TVA reporter, a French journalist who got pushed on air, which is the stupidest. I can't imagine doing a stupider thing than pushing over a journalist on air, because all it's going to do is galvanize everyone against you and validate the worst things that are being said. So if anyone spat on Evan, I missed that, but that's really unfortunate. I think Evan's pretty fair. I think he's a really tough journalist who asks tough questions to everyone, but he has his own biases as well. Like, I'll give you an example. He got really worked up and upset that Elon Musk put out a stupid Twitter meme comparing Trudeau to Hitler, right? It was a joke. He got really offended by that and got on his high horse. He didn't have the same reaction for 4 years when everyone was comparing Donald Trump to Hitler, right? He didn't have the same reaction when people today are calling Putin Hitler. Like, you could say that there's bad leaders, and Putin is one for sure, but it was so over the top in his defense of Trudeau that you just sort of shake your head. But I would say Evan's one of the better ones. And then there are also the ones that are the worst. There's a handful of journalists in the Parliamentary Press Gallery who don't even act like journalists. They act like activists pushing their agenda. They don't ask questions, especially of conservative politicians. They interrogate them. Like Justin Ling, who's a freelance guy, very, very left wing, and he's always pushing a pet cause. He was in one of Aaron O'Toole's final interviews before he got ousted. His basically his line of questioning to Aaron O'Toole, and he repeated this like 5 times, like, what were you thinking? Why would you meet with these truckers? What are you thinking, sir? What are you thinking? And those aren't journalistic questions. That's again, that's an interrogation. And the fact that Aaron O'Toole would even justify or dignify his questions with response is beyond me, because I think that the conservative politicians need to be a lot tougher with these journalists, especially ones that are over the top activists who, they do their own research and then they say, like, I've concluded that the truckers are bad, so how come you don't agree with me, basically. I think that whoever's the next conservative leader needs to be really tough with these journalists and reject the premise of the question, which is what we see a guy like Ron DeSantis down in Florida do. He's very knowledgeable about what he's talking about. So if a journalist comes to him with one of these sort of weak lines of attacks, he'll just sort of smack them down. And it's satisfying for conservatives to see that. But I think that it also makes sure that those journalists aren't going to try these little tricks that journalists do, that they're going to bring, solid journalistic questions rather than their sort of like lazy, shallow activist questions that you see a lot of the time.
Thanks so much for that, Candice. Actually, if we could go back to Julian, Julian, if you want to demute your mic and explain the Diagolon situation. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I don't want Julian to be left out of this. There's several other messages and we have some time. So do you want to demute Julian and ask your question?
Hello there. My name's Julian Nishinsky. My question is whether it's been reported that there were links of the trucker convoy and the right-wing group Diagolon. Diagolon is a group that were linked to the Coutts, Alberta arms hold that the police pulled in, and they've also apparently been linked to the Ontario theft in Pickering of arms hold, again, theft from a major handgun producer. Diagolon is an organization apparently that wants to unite Alberta, BC, Alaska, right across as a band, a diagonal band across the US all the way down to Florida. Their flags were being apparently used during the protest. The question is, to what degree is this true? Because they are linked to, from what my research on them is that they're linked to the Sons of Odin from Finland, who are not a nice group to be involved with. And,
sure.
and so my concern when I was reading this, and it was from several sources, that if the trucker convoy did have this sort of organization behind it, I wasn't really sure that the information that was being fed to us was realistic. And I was also doubting the veracity behind some of this. I mean, does anyone else on the meeting tonight, has anyone else heard these stories? I mean, they were quite widely reported.
So I can definitely speak to the Coutts, Alberta situation, because you're right. There were a group of, I believe it was 11 individuals who were arrested, and they had a large cache of guns. So I think there's four of them that have been charged, and they are in front of court right now. And the charges, I believe, include conspiracies to commit murder against RCMP officers. So the allegation is that they were planning to ambush the blockade and basically just kill all the police officers, something along those lines. It's unconscionable, horrific. The fact that these guys were messed up in the convoy at all, they need to be loudly condemned, and people distance them from themselves. The Rebel had reporters on the ground in Coots as well, and they were reporting, they were talking to the organizers. I didn't see any connection whatsoever. I didn't see, from the images and the footage that I saw from Coots, it didn't seem like the 14 or 11 individuals who were arrested had anything to do with the broader movement. I don't think they should have been blocking a border in the first place. I'm not for these kind of blockades, even to make a political point like that. So I don't support the blocking of borders, and I certainly in no way, shape, or form would ever support anyone with a plot to murder cops. I think that's horrific. That being said, the media seized on this incident to try to paint the entire movement again with this idea that the people in Ottawa were there to, it was January 6th, they were there to seize the government, to occupy it. It was a siege. Their plan was to overthrow the government, basically kill people and overthrow the government. There's no evidence of that. Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino tried to make this point at a press conference after the Emergency Act was initiated. And he actually, this is one of the rare instances of the media holding a politician to account, because he sort of used vague language to say those individuals who were arrested in Coots have a relationship with the people in Ottawa. And so the journalists picked up on that, like, what do you mean a relationship? Do they have direct ties? And this question was asked like 3 times by journalists. Do they have, is there any ties? Is there anything that that points, that draws a connection? Like, are they communicating? Are they together? Is there a group? And basically what he had to say in the end was that their language was similar. The language that they were using online was similar to the people in Coots, which basically goes to say that they don't have evidence, they don't have anything connecting the two groups. It was just based on his interpretation of the types of phrases that they were using online, which to me is total nonsense. And I can share that clip with the group, because we clipped it for True North. We wrote about it, how the public safety minister didn't make that point. And it was the same thing. So the head of FinTrack, the agency in the federal government that tracks terrorism and money laundering, he was brought to testify in the House of Commons 3 or 4 days ago. And he said that there was no evidence whatsoever that the people who were donating to the trucker convoy, or the trucker convoy itself, was linked to any extremist or terrorist groups. And that's not, in my opinion, that's the head of the person in the federal government who's in charge of this. So I completely concede to the fact that there was a plot in Coots, and it was horrific. I think that there were probably some people out there in the trucker convoy. We're talking about a convoy and a protest that included, tens, hundreds of thousands of people from coast to coast, including big rallies that were happening in Victoria, Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, Quebec City, right? So we're talking about a large group of people. I don't doubt that there were some people in there that were sort of nasty racists, trying to organize, trying to recruit for their, deranged causes. Those kind of people, I think, should be singled out and excluded. I think that the people in the convoy should make it clear that those people are not part of the group. But this is, again, part of the problem with a large sort of decentralized bottom-up movement. It's like there's no one, it's not a political party where you have to buy a membership, where they're screening you and they're making sure that no one says anything unsavory or no one has any connections with movements. It's like, it's just a big public movement, it's a populist movement. And so the media, again, does this thing where they focus in on the worst of the worst actors, and then they use that to paint the entire group. And I'll relate this back to some reporting that I did just last week, because Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister, was at a pro-Ukraine rally in Toronto over the weekend, and she was photographed holding up a banner that represents the Bandera movement in Ukraine, which is a far-right nationalist Nazi movement. And basically no one in the media covered it, right? So when it came to the trucker convoy, the standard was that everyone is painted by the accusations against the worst of the worst people there. Like, one guy is holding up a swastika, therefore everyone, the protest is a Nazi. Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister, takes a photograph with a banner representing Stefan Bandera. Stefan Bandera was a Nazi leader in Ukraine during World War II. And yet, rather than saying the same thing about her, the media flipped it and said anyone talking about this is sort of like a Russian propagandist and a pro-Putin shill or whatever. So They don't use the same standard against themselves, and that's been shown. It took 2 weeks, and that was shown. But again, just to repeat, like, I think that there were some bad people in the audience at the trucker convoy, but I don't think that the entire movement should be. I don't think that's the standard that we should have. I don't think the standard we should have is that everyone is guilty for what a handful of individuals do.
Okay, thank you very much, Candice. And Julian, if you could mute your mic again, and we're going to go maybe to an open thing in a minute. So the next question is from Mike, who's on our board of directors. How do we get people to check out alternate news sources rather than to continue to rely on the legacy media? And perhaps this is already happening amongst younger adults. So you've sort of addressed this, but you might want to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, every time that there's a big media news event, we gain followers. I think True North had our videos just on Twitter alone were viewed 40 million times in February. And I think we grew our Twitter following by like 25%. I think we're now at 120,000 followers over there. And same thing on Facebook, YouTube, like every time there's sort of like a big event, more and more people tune into us, and then we can kind of establish ourselves as a source for news. I think a lot of it has to just be word of mouth though, right? Like young people, the way that we get in front of them is just through shares. People sharing our videos on Facebook and YouTube. And the more that their friends are talking about it, the more they're likely to talk about. I think it's probably more of a challenge to reach older people like my parents who don't go online much. They get their news from the CBC because they just turn on the TV and that's what they watch, or they read the Vancouver Sun. And they're reasonably well informed, but they don't ever really get the alternative perspective unless they come to me and ask about it. But it's like part of it is a challenge of distribution because we do exist online, digital. So that's where we aim to. And then part of it is just sort of engaging more and more people, telling good stories, getting people to share content because they like it and they agree with it. And again, like every time there's something like a trucker convoy, I think we gain gain new audience and gain new credibility to people who are just sick and tired of what they're seeing on the legacy media.
Thanks. Next question, we've got quite a few of them here. This is from Irene Oakes, who happens to be on our board. Hi, Candice, thank you for this input. I have just heard that there's a new bill being introduced in Parliament to somehow deny or destroy the ability of independent media to function. In fact, to ban platforms like yours. Do you want to react to that?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple bills that the Liberals are playing around with, and I do agree that this is a big threat for Canadians. And I'm happy that Justin Trudeau is held to a minority government right now, although I fear that with Jagmeet Singh as leader of the NDP, that doesn't really mean much. So the best we can hope for is a snap election at some point where the Conservatives get their act together. But yeah, there's two bills that came out in the last Parliament that were of major concern. Bill C-10, which was an act that sought to regulate the algorithms of social media companies. So the idea that they don't like the fact that Facebook has an algorithm that they don't know, and they want to be the ones meddling it, which from a technical perspective is sort of mind-boggling. Like, I don't think that anyone in the federal government really has that capacity to take Facebook's like proprietary algorithmic data and somehow manipulate it. But the government having that power is something that is fundamentally wrong. And then one of the major issues that people had was, who was going to be regulated within that. Would user-generated content, like just people making videos and people, taking a footage of the Freedom Convoy or whatever, would they be regulated? There was some dispute, but anyway, C-10 didn't end up getting passed because of the election. So it passed in the House of Commons, but didn't make it through the Senate in time when the Parliament shut down. So they've now reintroduced it as Bill C-11. I think it's called the Online Streaming Bill. And one of the things that the Liberals had done was take out that user-generated content stipulation in C-10. It's now back in C-11, which is really worrying, concerning. So it's just being debated right now. There's another bill called Bill C-36, which sought to bring back the there's a hated part of the human rights tribunals that the Harper government eliminated, Section 13 of the Human Rights Act. So Bill C-36 is a bill to crack down on so-called hate propaganda, hate crimes, and hate speech. And that was introduced during the last Parliament. I don't believe it's been reintroduced yet, but it's coming. So, keep an eye on this stuff because it is really scary. There's some great people that I follow. Michael Geist, who has a website just called michaelgeist.ca. He's sort of the top commenter on tech policy. I think he used to be at the CRTC. I'm not exactly sure what his background is. Someone on this call might know better than me, but he has a blog where he sort of gives a day-to-day breakdown, and I would definitely recommend following him for more information on that.
Thanks very much. I just wrote his name down. Okay, the
Yeah,
next.
it's Geist. Geist is G-E-I-S-T. Michael
Oh, okay.
Geist.
Okay, I'll
G-E-I-S-T.
correct that. Okay, next question is Derek Schlapp. What can you tell us about Tamara Leash? Is that how you pronounce her last name? Leash?
I think it's
And the
Lich.
charges against her, etc.
Well, I can't tell you all the charges against her off the top of my head because I don't remember, but I know that she was denied bail. The judge that she's seen, I can pull up her name. I can't remember it off the top of my head either. But the judge presiding over her case was a former Liberal cabinet minister. Sorry, a former Liberal candidate for the Liberals. She lost, and then she was appointed to the federal court. So again, whether or not she's biased, the appearance of a conflict is so over the top that she should have removed herself from the case. She didn't. Tamara Lynch not being offered bail. I could give you 10 examples of violent criminals who were given bail, including an individual who rammed his car into a trucker protest in Winnipeg, ran over 4 people. He's charged with attempted murder, and he is an ideologically political violence, which is also another word for terrorism. Another word for terrorism is the same thing. This guy was given bail for $10,000. Tamara Lynch was denied bail, but I believe her case is being heard again tomorrow. And so I follow her lawyer on social media, and I think he was optimistic that she was going to be out on bail tomorrow. So, sorry, not tomorrow, Monday. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not, don't have all the information at my fingertips, but she was one of the main organizers. She was the organizer of the original GoFundMe campaign. She put out a teary video the night before she was arrested saying that she believed she was going to be arrested. And at the time, I remember thinking, like, I don't think they're going to arrest her. She's not violent. She's not, doing anything illegal. So the fact that she was arrested and being held for this long is really unconscionable, in my opinion. Another interesting side note, for people who aren't familiar with the entire saga, there was an original fundraising campaign on a website called GoFundMe. They raised about $10 million, and basically there was political pressure from the municipal government and federal government in Ottawa. They told the head of this Silicon Valley tech firm, GoFundMe, that they were going to have to come and appear before committee. The very next day, GoFundMe said that this campaign was frozen and that they were giving back all the money. Basically, they were offering refunds of the $10 million. So then there was a new replacement campaign that was created called Give, Send, Go. That was the one that ended up also getting stopped by an Ontario court, and the data got hacked by hackers who then began doxing all these individuals. And so individuals who had donated to that second fund, had their lives ruined, had their stores broken into, were fired from various jobs because journalists were gleefully doxing them and writing news stories about how they donated to this campaign. Well, anyway, the original GoFundMe campaign, the people who run that company testified in the House of Commons on Thursday, and they said that 88% of those donors were Canadian. So this whole idea that it was a foreign-funded campaign isn't true. The overwhelming majority, over $9 million, came from Canadians. So that was another, media completely getting it wrong. So.
Okay, thanks very much. That clarifies a lot of things. So the next question is from Linda Foster. Hi, Candice. Thanks for talking with us. I've noticed that some of the online content regarding the truckers and other news issues are being removed, or it seems that they're being censored. Can you comment on this? Also, not being able to trust the media is creating some significant issues for people's mental health. Any commentary on that?
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, about the mental health thing, I think that my general comments are that everybody in our society seems to be really wound up tight from COVID. Like, I think COVID had a real impact on people's well-being, especially young people. If you look at the sort of death toll from diseases of despair, I believe it's 5 times as many people died from suicides and drug overdoses for people under 65 versus who died from COVID. So I think I observe both online. I observe that the online rhetoric is really, really heating up. But even in real life, I've seen so many examples of just weird little like arguments and people fighting, people yelling at each other in like stores and restaurants and stuff. Like I think people in society are really wound up tight. And I think that COVID is having its toll on people, like just the complete erosion of our communities. And so, the adding on top of it, the sort of stress of like, here's this very reasonable convoy of freedom loving truckers, and look at the way they're treated. Like it's despicable. And I agree with that. To me, you have to separate what's happening online and in the news with real life, which I try to keep myself grounded by spending a lot of time with my family and having entire days where I don't go on my phone. Like my husband and I do like a digital detox on Sundays where I'm better at it than he is. He's usually on his phone by like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and just checking all his emails and stuff. But I try to completely turn my phone off on Sunday right until, around dinner time, where I start to do FaceTime calls with my family and stuff like that. My parents and people who don't live in the same place. But yeah, no, I think it's really tough. And sorry, I can't remember what the beginning part of that question was.
Oh, just, that's okay. Notice that some of the online content regarding truckers and other musicians are being removed or they seem to be censored. So I think what Linda's saying is this really happening? Is it that they are suppressing necessary information?
I haven't seen that. If there's some examples, I can look into it, but I do notice some things like, when you Google something, the first things that come up are always like CTV and CBC. It never points you to like the Rebel or True North or something like that. But I haven't heard or seen anyone saying that content had been removed about the convoy.
Okay, thanks very much. And then the next one is from Jackie and my wife, and she mentions that on Monday you were on, and I recall this, you were on Canada's Strong and Free Networks, a webinar, and you were a guest panelist, and you said something that was very interesting for us. You said that it was becoming difficult for journalists to report on complex news items, right? That there's a kind of black and white perspective. Could you expand on this?
Yeah, well, so I mean, this was all sort of like really jarring for a lot of people that like the Trudeau government announced an end to the Emergency Act on Wednesday. And on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern time, and at Wednesday at like 11 p.m., it became evident that Vladimir Putin was invading Russia. And so the Trudeau government really benefited from a very fast news cycle that no one cared about the trucker convoy anymore, and that everything was focused on Russia to an absurd degree, where I began getting criticism on Thursday morning, like, how could you be talking about the trucker convoy? There's a real war going on in the world. In a really condescending way, I got a DM from a former Harper cabinet minister saying that my stuff was reading as parody because, we called the Ottawa zone, the red zone, that the police were calling a red zone. We call it a no-go zone. And, how could we be comparing it, calling it a no-go zone when there was an actual war going on? And so I think that it was really, kind of an insult to Canadians that we were no longer allowed to talk about the assault on our freedoms because some other dictator was, invading another sovereign country. Like, you can hold two thoughts at the same time, right? You can be capable of condemning what was happening in Ukraine, and also be concerned about your liberties here at home, especially when people's bank accounts were still frozen. And then the second thing is like, the legacy media who just spent the last month lying to us about the truckers, like lying left, right, and center. And I don't use that word lightly. I actually almost never use the word lying in my journalism, but I can point to 100 examples of things that they said that were just flat out untrue. And then the exact same journalists, exact same individuals, the same outlets are now supposed to be like completely trusted when it came to Ukraine. What I saw was not journalism. It was like a lot of cheerleading towards one side, very severe simplification of the issue. I don't know how much time you want me to spend talking to you about my opinion on Ukraine, but I think that there's a lot of credibility issues with the media. And when they turn around and try to tell you that they're now the authority on a foreign conflict and you can be skeptical of their reports, even though they're reporting stories that have been debunked or things that turned out to be propaganda, And now we're getting into this weird situation where if you're critical of legacy media and their coverage, they'll go straight to you're a propagandist for Putin. And I saw that when I was reporting on Chrystia Freeland holding this Bandera banner at a protest. It's like the amount of times I got called a pro-Putin shill by blue checkmark legacy media journalists was despicable. And it's like, I'm not talking about Putin, right? I've condemned Putin, like obviously, but I'm talking about our own deputy prime minister trying to hold her accountable. And they just sort of like every time there's one of these debates, it's like the rhetoric gets heated up even more and more. So it's not just like, well, I disagree with your report. It's like you're evil, you're a propagandist for the other side. And it's like,
Right.
I think so many people are just sort of incapable of taking the media seriously. It's like we don't trust them. We don't trust anything you say. And I think if anything, that might drive more people to the opposite side, saying, well, I didn't trust you on COVID. I don't trust you on the truckers. And now I'm not going to trust you on Ukraine. So I'm going to go seek out, what the other side is saying. And then they say, oh, okay, we're going to ban RT now. It's like, what do you think that's going to do? It's going to drive more people to be interested in what's being said on RT and seeking to get that other side of the story. So I think they're they're digging themselves into a deeper hole with every single news cycle that we go through. And I think
Thanks.
Ukraine has been just another example of that.
So thank you. From Rick Higgins, do you feel or do you think that as Canadians, we are now so apathetic concerning the truth in any form that it's unlikely to make any difference in our current trajectory towards extreme authoritarianism? That's his question.
I don't think that apathetic is the right word for Canadians. I mean, maybe some. I think Canadians are very patient, very rule abiding, law abiding. They're probably one of the most law abiding people in the world, and so our instinct is to fall in line, and order is prioritized amongst many other values. And so that can be a great thing. We're a very stable country, and it can also be a bad thing because it's like you Canadians are more than willing to comply with draconian orders that curb our liberties, and doing it for sort of like a greater good. So I think it's sort of a double-edged sword. What I saw with the freedom protests is that so many people reached their limit and saying enough is enough, and it was a powerful movement to push back against it. So I don't want to be pessimistic right now, because I think in this moment with the trucker convoy and the momentum and the successes that I think they had from a public policy perspective, we should be optimistic that there are all of these people who are willing to, put themselves on the line, sacrifice themselves in many ways to push and prove this point, and that they have had a positive impact on public opinion. So I think more people are coming around. I think the country is freer now than it was a month ago, and I hope that we can continue in that trajectory. I hope that whoever leads the Conservative Party can kind of channel in on this populist element and movement that's happening right now, because I think it's a gift to the Conservative Party if they can properly foster it.
I agree. And I was actually talking to someone who had been a Conservative candidate before, and she said that she had given up on freedom in Canada until the Freedom 2022 movement came up. So I think it's encouraging for a lot of people. So this is from Reed, our chairman, and then we'll go to open mic, if that's okay. One of the reasons we invited you to share with us today was to introduce you to our FDC followers. Networking with groups like yours expands our influence in the nation. So can you comment on the value of networking, on working together with other groups?
Yeah, I think it's really important. One of the actually the way that Perry and I know each other is through Civitas, which is another networking organization society where we get together once a year and have a conference and sort of have all the debates that we have been wanting to have all year and have it in person. And I just think that there's so many positive things that come out of something like that. Just the friendships, the mentoring, the opportunities. Like every job I've ever had has been through someone who I knew, through school or through work or through a friend. Like the way that we gain opportunities and interesting experiences in our life is through the people that we know in our community. And I think, especially for conservatives, having community is so powerful. Just sort of as a personal safety net, but also the feeling that you get from a community. Like one of the things that is unfortunate about COVID is our lack of opportunity to get together in the flesh and talk to people, right, and look into the whites of someone else's eyeballs and talk about issues. Instead, we're doing it all through these digital forms, which isn't the same thing. You're not actually talking to people. You're not communicating with people. And for me, I always feel really recharged and optimistic and energized after going to an in-person meeting or a conference, that I found like-minded people, and I feel inspired to continue because like everyone, right? We have good days and bad. And some days it's, running a company, being in the media that's completely in a biased landscape, like it can really get to you. And, seeing your team, your friends, your family, your extended community, it can really kind of energize you. So I think that there's just so many benefits that come from these kinds of organizations, and we need them. Like these are the I know it's almost cliche to say, but Edmund Burke's little platoons of society. Like it's like we have these little groups that hold us together, and we can have a shared purpose and share our values and go into the world stronger together. And I think that's certainly important. And I hope with sort of COVID hopefully being in our rearview window, we'll have more and more opportunities to get together, to meet with like-minded people, to share our ideas. And I think it's incredibly important for Canadians at this moment in time. The media will give the government, all the leeway it wants to just sort of say, okay, COVID's over, now let's move on. No, we need to hold them accountable. We need to make sure that they don't abuse their powers like this again in the future. So I think that having these kinds of groups and having the kinds of networks needed to organize and, do things like what John Carpe does over at the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, like it's just so incredibly important, not just to address some of the issues of today, but make sure that some of the worst abuses that happened yesterday don't happen again tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I agree with you. Okay, at this point, I think we're going to go to more direct contact, and we'll have people can demute their mics if they wish, but we ask that you put your raised hand icon, click on your raised hand icon if you want to ask Candice a question. Please don't raise your physical hand, and the raised hand icon is at the bottom or top of your computer screen, depending on what kind of computer you have. And that way we can go from question to question. If you raise your hand like that, we may miss you. So, okay, so we'll open it up now completely to direct questions. So let's see here. I'm going to check. If anybody has a direct question to ask, they're welcome to do so.
Yes, Dick here.
Oh, Dick. Okay, Dick Folks.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Candice. Thank you very much for all you do. I was speaking to my bank clerk today, and I was saying that there's been all accounts seized or whatever they did and frozen. And was there one actually for $10 where a lady lost her everything for her $10 donation?
So I believe that was MP Mark Strahl out in Chilliwack. I believe he tweeted that he had a constituent who was a single mother who had her account frozen over, I thought it was a $50 donation. That's the one that sticks out to me. But there was, I'm trying to remember just all the reporting that we've done recently, that a story of sorry, I should pull it up because it might help me, but someone was testifying in front of a Commons committee, and they said that it's not likely that your account would be frozen if you made a donation to the Give, Send, Go or GoFundMe campaign, but it's not impossible. And so, of course, we know
possible?
government, it's not impossible was the quote. So of course that leaves himself open to say, well, we don't think we're doing it, but it's not, it's not outside the question. And so again, I think like, I'll just say this, that there were at least, the government admits to freezing at least 250 bank accounts. That's more than the US government froze after 9/11. The US government froze something like 180 bank accounts of Al-Qaeda financiers and terrorists in the aftermath of 9/11. So the reaction that Trudeau had from a sort of finance funding perspective, so he treated those truckers worse than the George Bush administration treated Al-Qaeda. Which is pretty scary. And so I think again, this will all come out, right? We'll learn everything. All the information will come out eventually. And I hope that the conservatives win in the next election, one of the things they can immediately do is a full scale investigation into the abuses of power that happened during the
Sure.
trucker convoy and the aftermath.
Well, I told this lady that I would investigate and get back to her. So, that's reasonable. If I say something, I should have facts to back it up. So I'll chase that up more with Mark Strahl then.
Yeah, and I can try to find this piece on our True North website about the donation, the person that testified, because I can't off the top of my head remember who it was. But
Sure. You see my name.
I'll-
You see my name there, do you,
yeah,
Cam?
yes,
It's
yeah, I'll
good.
make a little note of it here.
The email is folks@shaw.ca.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you for asking the question, Dick. Okay, so we have another question from Edward Fields. Go ahead.
Candice, I'm wondering, because of your experience, whether you could comment on what it is from your perspective that, where we are our own worst enemies in the way we engage with the press or with the public, because I suspect that there are things that we need to change in the way we engage with government or with the press and with others. Could you comment on that, please?
So maybe you could just clarify the question a little bit for me. So when you say we, do you mean conservatives? Do you mean independent reporters like myself?
Yeah, I mean people who are conservative, small c.
Yeah, so I think one of the issues that I had with the former conservative federal leader, Aaron O'Toole, was that his sort of strategy was that he was going to like water down the conservative brand, make it more appealing to people who live in downtown Toronto and who read the legacy media. Like he basically thought that if he could sort of sanitize himself from all of the worst accusations against conservatives, that the media would start treating him fairly. And I think that we learned pretty quickly that that's just not the case. Like if you look at the last federal election and the way that the media covered it, basically whatever the Trudeau government's attack lines of the day became the line of questioning to Aaron O'Toole. All of the accusations. Oh, you're trying to Americanize and privatize our healthcare. Oh, you're trying to legalize assault weapons. Whatever it was that the Trudeau government was saying, that was what the media was asking Aaron O'Toole. They didn't give him a fair shake at all. So I think the strategy of, trying to change who you are to appease and hope for fair coverage from the media is a failed strategy. And I hope that the Conservatives don't try that again. I think that the Conservatives have a very broad appeal across the country, and they shouldn't be ashamed of that, and they shouldn't be embarrassed about it, and they shouldn't try to sanitize who they are to appease media, because media are never going to be fair. The media is useful. It helps them to reach a segment of the population who only get their news from the legacy media. So, you can't completely ignore them and tune them out. I don't think that the Trump strategy would work here in Canada as well. But at the same time, I don't think that they're ever going to be fair. So I think the best thing you can do is, like I said, sort of what Ron DeSantis does is he's just very knowledgeable and aware of the issues, and he tells the media when they're full of it, and he's willing to push back. And more, I think conservative leaders can appeal directly to the people. I see Jason Kenney doing this a lot. He will do like a live stream on his Facebook where he'll just speak kind of directly to the people of Alberta. He won't go through and do a press conference where he's peppered with a bunch of loaded unfair questions. So I think that there is ways to get around it. And as far as conservatives sort of hiding away their values and saying like, okay, we just need to completely sanitize ourselves and make sure that we fall in line with all of these liberal documents, I don't think that's true. I think there's more opportunities now than before to present, different opinions, for instance, on healthcare. I think that many Canadians saw just how bad our healthcare system buckled under the weight of a pandemic, and like the limited amount of funding. That's not a problem that's going to go away. Maybe now is the opportunity to try to change our system and find something better. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Edward, and thank you, Candice. Now we have another question from Petrushka. You have to demute your mic, Patricia.
Hi, Candice. Thank you so much. I'm wondering, are you optimistic that what's happened with the trucker convoy and with the government's dreadful response, knee-jerk response, are you optimistic that what has happened will truly be revealed, will come out?
Yes, I am. I think that the Trudeau government during the trucker convoy, they didn't come across in the way that they tend to, during election campaigns. Justin Trudeau wants to be this sort of like lovable, reasonable, like nice person who is open-minded and progressive and believes in diversity and all this stuff. I think we saw a different side of Trudeau during the trucker convoy. I saw someone who was mean, bitter, resentful, angry, panicked because of his lack of response. And I think this, many Canadians saw him in that similar light. I saw so many videos on TikTok and Instagram, which is, those are mediums that are very dominated by sort of Gen Zs and millennials, like people in their 20s and 30s. And what one of the favorite ones I saw, and this one's getting millions of views, is so the audio was Justin Trudeau's voice giving his speech the day after the trucker convoy about how Canadians were disgusted by what they saw, how these people were stealing from the homeless and they were desecrating monuments. But then anyway, so you didn't see Trudeau, you heard his voice, and what you saw was just sort of like different handheld camera footage of people dancing, people singing, people cleaning the monuments, people giving food to homeless people. Like it was exactly the opposite of what Trudeau said. And, I saw those videos going viral in a space of like 20-year-olds, right? And it's like, people don't see Trudeau as this sort of optimistic, sunny ways, progressive young guy anymore. They're starting to see him as like a bitter, out of touch old guy that's just like, why wouldn't he talk to the truckers? Canadians are notoriously like even keeled and nice and willing to talk to each other. And here you have a guy not even willing to talk. And then on top of that, the COVID element where all these young people just want to go out and live their life. I feel so sorry for, there's a girl that lives down the street and she babysits for us. She's 16 and, she's a competitive dancer, and just the number of things that have been canceled for her in the last couple of years. Her older brother graduated from high school last year and didn't even have a prom or anything. Like, I feel so bad for these kids that they're missing out. They're going to university and it's all remote and they don't even get to meet their classmates and their friends and have this really important life experience. And so I think all of these young people are so turned off of this sort of style of government and this style of policy that it will have a lasting impact on those people and the way that they see the world and the way they see the media and the way they see Justin Trudeau. So yes, I'm definitely optimistic. I think the truckers won in so many ways. I mean, almost immediately, the Quebec government did an about face on that ridiculous vax tax policy. They were going to add an additional tax to the unvaccinated. We saw, I'm sorry to say, almost every province aside from British Columbia dropped their vaccine mandate passport thing. Most of them have moved away from masking. I think that the world is now moving on from COVID, and hopefully, again, we'll keep track of everything that the government did and make sure that it doesn't happen again. I think that's the important sort of charge that we should all focus on right now. But I do think that the worst of COVID is behind us. Finally, people are willing to live with it. And that especially young people, there was a poll that said overall Canadians didn't side with the truckers. I think the majority said that they don't agree with them. Again, polling is always really subjective based on the wording of the polls and who the 100 people that were spoken to. But one of the things that I found really optimistic was that people under 30, 60% of them sided with the truckers, which was more than any other age group. So.
Great. Another question from Rick Higgins.
Hello, Candice. Thank you very, very much for your intelligence and the way that you put information and facts together. I have some good news to report. There's an app called Zello, Zello, and what it is, it's an app, and I just got this news now. The app allows you to listen in on the truckers' radios. So here on Vancouver Island, I believe what happened with the truckers is they lit a fuse. And the question is being asked is, okay, they lit the fuse, will you burn? will Canadians burn? Will they be the fire to cause the burn? And what I'm seeing here on Vancouver Island is that there's a real impetus now. There's a lot of people are getting active. There's so many groups doing different things, and they're starting to get organized and structured and have leadership. So every day on Vancouver Island, Camel River, Nanaimo, I think it's Chemainus and Victoria, people stand on bridges and wave flags. It used to be a couple of people, now it's 15 to 20. Every Saturday, there's a convoy that comes down starts at Camel River and goes to the Parliament buildings. Today was a big day. March the 5th was a very, very big day here on Vancouver Island at the Parliament. Trucker convoys came down from Prince Rupert and all over the island. The mayor, in her infinite wisdom in Victoria, the same mayor, of course, that hates John McDonald's statue, in her infinite wisdom passed a piece of legislation a couple of days ago to charge people who honk their horns in Victoria $125. So when I was listening on Zello this morning as they were going down, they were talking about this. They said, I don't care. I'll pay the fine. It's worth it for the cost. So it's all done. They're coming back, and it's nothing but love, love, love. They're using the LOVE word. It was wonderful to be there. It was just so great. I don't know how many would have been. I'm hoping it was thousands. I'll get a number later tonight. But as they're driving back in their trucks, and they're just cheering and they're so excited because not only is it happening, but they can see it building. So, thank you for your part, Candice, and keeping things going in this nation. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you. I think that's really inspiring. And I have to say, back in 2010, I volunteered for the Olympics. I just finished with my schooling, and I volunteered to the Olympics. So I was one of those Olympic greeters and hosts. And I was, for anyone that was there, they had us in blue snowsuits. And I got to work at what used to be called GM Place during the gold medal game when Canada played the US. We all know Sidney Crosby scored and Canada won the gold medal. It was one of the most wonderful patriotic moments of my entire life, because downtown Vancouver instantly got flooded with Canadians, and it was just this outpouring of Canadian patriotism from a country that we're not usually as outwardly patriotic, and it was just one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And every time I was watching videos of the Freedom Convoy and I saw the people waving their the hockey stick with the Canadian flag has become so iconic. There was a 5-minute frostbite warning in Ottawa that day. It was somewhere between -21 and -30 all day long. It was one of the coldest days of the year and one of the coldest winters that the Central Canada has had in a very, very long time. And yet there were thousands of people out there, celebrating, hugging. It was like a protest of people who weren't professional protesters, right? The people that we see at protests, they all know their chants and they know the drill. They do the marches. They do it all the time. And there's sort of professional protest class. That wasn't the truckers. Truckers, it was like people who had never been to a protest before. They didn't even really know what to do. So they turned it into like a Canada Day celebration, which again was really, it was just inspiring. It was heartwarming. It made me so proud of my country. I got to do, I started getting invited to do interviews with news stations all over the world. So I was on TV in India and Great Britain and Australia. And, it was cool to know that all these people are talking about my country in Canada, and that Canadian flags were being used in protests all over the world. So the Canadian flag came to symbolize not just what it does for us, but people all over. Like the Canadian flag is becoming synonymous with freedom convoys, which I think is such an incredible development. And I think it's really inspiring. So we should all kind of maintain that spirit and keep on fighting together.
Great. I agree with you entirely. That's really inspiring. Okay. Mike, you have the next one.
Perry, the chairman is intervening.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right.
We try to keep faith with you in terms of our time parameters also. And I see Mike there. Mike, you'll have to email Candice your question.
I'm okay with one more question.
It's 5:30 and I'm sure none of us have had our supper yet. And I'm going to do something distinctly Canadian. I'm going to have my supper and then I'm going to a hockey game. So there you go. Thank you, Candice. We really appreciate you. most of us are way over the hill and we're coming to the end of our lives. And to know that those of us who value freedom, our country, love our country, to know that somehow we're passing the torch to people like yourself. That's a good thing. I spent a number of years in the House of Commons, and I got interviewed by that very elite group of news people. Never felt I got a fair shake. It's only gotten worse. However, I think the truckers' convoy has changed things. We are part of a change in the thinking of Canadians, and you're part of that change, and we thank you for it. And we'll continue to support you as you will support us. And we'll just have hope and trust that our country turns around. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being part of Freedom Defense Canada. Continue to support us. We still appreciate your donations when you feel so moved. And make sure that you support Candice in True North and give her a few shekels every once in a while too. So thank you so much for coming and being with us today, all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Reed.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Nighty
Special
night.
thanks to Candice.